Start
All right, pay attention up here. So this is chapter 24. We're talking about Charles Darwin and evolution. And this is Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a naturalist, a guy who studies nature. And he came up through the schools in England, and his professors saw how great of a student he was. He loved nature. He used to collect beetles and draw and write about different animals he saw, and he did such a good job in college that his professors recommended that he be taken as the naturalist on this mapping ship called the Beagle that was going to travel around the world and map the coast of South America. And so this is him when he was older with one of his kids. He had a whole bunch of kids. He married his cousin. And a whole bunch of kids. And this was the ship, the trip that the Beagle went on. It started up here and went across the ocean. And everywhere you see on here is a place where it stopped. It bounced around the coast of South America. They were mapping. They were going on shore. They were looking at things. They were just it's kind of a voyage of discovery. And you want to have a naturalist like Charles Darwin on board so he can take account of what animals are there, what plants are there. You know, maybe you discover some plant that makes some chemical that you can use, and your country can go pick it and grow it and sell it, and who knows. Have a naturalist on board so he can figure things out. He can also tell you, hey, you can eat that mushroom, but don't eat that mushroom. That one will kill you. That one's good. So it's nice to have a naturalist on board just in case you need them. Again, Darwin was one of the best ones, so they recommended him for this journey, and he went all the way around the world, and probably his most famous stop was the Galapagos Islands right here, about 500 miles off the coast of Ecuador. I'll show you some pictures. I went there about 7 or 8 years ago and took a bunch of pictures, but he saw a lot of animals on those Galapagos Islands and plants that kind of got him thinking about organisms and how they change. And this idea of organisms changing over time is something that's been an idea that goes all the way back to the Greeks. It's called evolution. And evolution is the idea that organisms don't stay the same. They change and become different over a long time span. And the things that Darwin saw on this voyage got him thinking that not only that might occur, but it got him thinking about how it might occur. How might organisms change over time? And he came up with the theory of how organisms change over time. It's called natural selection. You ever heard of that? We're going to learn about how that works. But as it turns out, Darwin kind of pioneered that idea of natural selection, and he's famous for it. So from the Galapagos, they went over here to Australia and went all the way across the Indian Ocean here and back into the Atlantic and all the way back up to England. It was 5 years. 5 years of looking at stuff and collecting. A lot of people don't know about Darwin. He took a lot of guns with him, and he'd shoot and kill birds in the trees, and he'd dissect them, and he'd study them, and he'd bottle them and save them. And he was a big fossil hunter too. He'd dig up fossils that he would find in each location, and he'd bring those with him. And he'd draw pictures of everything. He was a good artist. He'd draw pictures in his books and journals, and he came home with tons of samples and pictures and fossils, and he was just kind of a celebrity when he got back. Everybody was wondering about his voyage, and he became famous. And all of this, he started at the age of 22 doing this. He was 27 when he got off the boat after a 5-year journey. So he was still a young person, and was probably the most famous naturalist in the world at that point. There he is. And here's a little video about part of his voyage. And it's kind of an old video, so there's some guys with some 80s hairdos that are kind of funny, but anyway. Good information.
It was a world in transition. The Industrial Revolution was just beginning. In Britain, it seemed all the world was opening to these engines of change. It was a time of big ideas and big men. There was Erasmus Darwin, a prosperous country physician, a published poet, a free thinker, and a champion of the new technology. His son, Robert, another man of influence and girth, followed him into medicine, and when Robert's second son was born, February 12, 1809, it was assumed he would be part of a third generation of country physicians. But Charles Robert Darwin was happier in the woods than the classroom. He preferred to be outdoors, hunting, bird watching, collecting, exploring.
Charles was in and out of country houses and barnyards, and he saw how people selected the best cattle, the best pigs, and the best horses, and bred from them to improve the quality of the stock. Later on, Charles would call this artificial selection. His own mother kept fancy pigeons, so Charles could see right at home that from a common rock pigeon, the kind you find in Trafalgar Square in England, you get all kinds of extraordinary breeds, Jacobins and Pouters and Nuns and like.
He abandoned his medical studies and wound up at Cambridge University, where he was to study for the ministry.
And that's when it first occurred to him that he could make his name in natural science. He could make better beetle collections than any of the beetle collectors. He came here to the River Cam and scouted along the banks and looked at the trees and pulled beetles out of the bark. He bested a lot of them.
Knowing full well that he was more interested in collecting bugs than saving souls, two of his professors recommended him for a voyage around the world. The refitted 90-foot warship named Beagle was to map the South American coast. It was the turning point in Darwin's life. Intended to last 2 years, it was 5 years before the Beagle returned. 5 years of collecting, observing, exploring, and writing. The most important stop for Darwin was the Galapagos Islands. This relatively young, isolated archipelago 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador was a naturalist's dream, a laboratory of evolution. In a feverishly busy 5 weeks, he followed seagoing iguanas and tracked tortoises that seemed to vary from island to island. He collected 13 different types of birds that all turned out to be finches, and 3 species of mockingbirds. The animals must have come to the islands from South America in the distant past, but these creatures varied remarkably from their mainland ancestors.
Darwin was amazing. He was 27 years old when he got off the Beagle. His notebooks were bulging with data about all the places he had visited. He had enormous collections.
In addition to adding to his beetle collection, he gathered 1,500 species preserved in alcohol, 4,000 skins, bones, and dried specimens, crates and crates of fossils. He returned with 3,000 pages of notes on entomology, geology, paleontology, and zoology. He was the toast of London's scientific community. Even his father was finally impressed.
That's a good trip.
We gotta go.
Here are the Galapagos Islands. It's a whole bunch of islands. I went there, flew into this island right here.
Is there a civilization on it?
Yep, there's a whole city and stuff on this island. There's thousands of people. Most of the other islands aren't inhabited, but a couple of them are. There's some people on this one. This one has active volcanism. We didn't go there. But we went to all these other islands.
Are all those little mountains that look like they have a hole in the top, is that a volcano?
They're all volcanoes, yep. This is, there's right here, there's lava coming up from the middle of the earth, and it makes these islands. And then the whole continental plate is moving that way. So for instance, this island right here, about 5 million years ago, used to be right here. And so this thing's not active anymore. This one's active. And in another 5 million years, this one right here will be over here. And it'll be a lot smaller because they erode over time. It's very interesting geology. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, you should take a geology class. Yeah.
Would there be a new island forming where the
Yeah, and this will move that way, and a new island will form over here. I think that one right there is a new island that's forming. Yes?
Do you think those two little nubs on the left side fit into the little place where it pinches off on the biggest island?
Like here?
No, the island that you said was active, that there are a lot of people
Here?
on.
There?
The little two nubs that stick out?
Those?
No, on the right side. Or left side.
There?
No, the ones that are attached to the island. Like to
That?
Yeah. Did they think they fit into that side on the other island?
Oh, over here?
Yeah, right there.
Ooh.
I don't know. Probably not. Probably not. Because the whole plate is moving, and so this thing, this thing didn't move away from this. This thing moved over, and then this thing formed.
Those are good seahorse.
Mr. Willis,
So yes.
how far apart are the islands?
They're pretty far apart. This is maybe 80 or 100 miles, say, from here to here. Maybe less than that. But it took us a whole night. We left here and we went to there, and it took us a whole night of going in a boat. I don't know how fast we were going. We slept on the boat while they drove to the next island. You'd wake up the next day, you'd be on a new island.
How big is
So maybe 50 miles or something like that, 40 miles. What's that?
How big is the boat? Like, was it
The
just-
boat was pretty big.
Oh,
It was, slept about 20 people on the boat, so it was about probably a 100-foot boat. Maybe bigger than that. Here's some of the creatures that Darwin saw that made him think that evolution happens, that organisms change. These are marine iguanas. They look a lot like the land iguanas that you find on South America, but they can swim in the ocean, and they have all these adaptations for swimming. They have real fat tails to help propel them along. They have adaptations for grabbing on and hanging on to rocks.
How long can they hold their
And they
breath?
have tooth adaptations for eating seaweed. What's that?
How long can they hold their breath?
They can hold their breath for about an hour. There's me next to some iguanas. You can just hang out with them. What they do is they get cold. The water there, even though it's on the equator, the water's cold because it comes up on a current from Antarctica. And you can, and these things will dive in the water and they'll eat seaweed, and then they'll come up onto the land and they'll lay on the rocks to warm themselves up. And then they'll go back. And so
Are they
they're
vicious?
all over the place on the rocks there. There's a couple of them.
Are they
Scary?
I took these pictures. Oh, they're kind of cute, I think.
are they
They eat plants, so they won't bite you.
They have like claws.
Yeah,
They
those
scratch
claws, they might if you mess with them, but
Did you touch one?
We weren't allowed to touch them.
Oh.
Those claws help them grab onto rocks. So when they're at the bottom of the under the water eating algae, they don't float back to the top.
Oh.
It also helps them pull themselves out of the ocean. There's one I took swimming by me. That's with an underwater camera.
It
He's
looks
just
like,
swimming on by me.
what is that?
Godzilla?
The monster that's
Godzilla?
The Gila monster.
monster.
Oh.
Seals.
They had a bunch of sea lions there. That's a sea lion.
I love seals.
They're a little different than seals.
Could you touch that?
Nah, they didn't let you touch any of them. There's me sleeping with some sea lions. They like to sleep on the beach. They let you get right up close to them. None of these animals are afraid of humans because they haven't allowed hunting there in a couple hundred years.
Are there poachers?
No, they patrol it. A lot of money is spent on patrolling the area, and no person is allowed to be there without a guide. So we had a guide that was with us everywhere we went. And those guides watch you. They won't let you touch things. They won't let you shoot things or take things with you. This is a glyptodont. Darwin dug up glyptodont fossils and was shown glyptodont fossils by some of the native islanders. And he thought that glyptodonts look a lot like armadillos, but glyptodonts are way bigger than armadillos.
Armadillo.
Here's an armadillo compared to a glyptodont fossil.
Armadillos are not smart.
And Darwin figured that glyptodonts must have changed into armadillos, must have evolved into armadillos over millions of years.
But so why'd they get smaller?
Well, that's a good question. Darwin figured that if you're big and there's not much food around, you probably don't have a very good chance of surviving. So when times are scarce for food, that favors the small organisms. Small organisms tend to survive better when food is scarce. So perhaps food was scarce for a time, and only the small glyptodonts survived to have kids. And over millions of years or thousands of years of that happening, maybe the glyptodont got smaller and smaller and became the armadillo. That's the idea of evolution that he had going around in his head. That's me next to a glyptodont fossil.
Whoa.
Whoa. They're huge.
Yeah, I am. I'm pretty big. Oh, you're talking about the glyptodont. You're talking about me. Yeah. Yes.
That tail
How
is
does
big.
That was an
that
04?
big? Because we become something so small.
Yeah, it has to get smaller and smaller. You know, they found an island where there were miniature dwarf elephants on it.
I want one.
Elephants about this big. That had succumbed to the same evolutionary pressures and gotten smaller over time. Now we know dinosaurs are huge, and we know that they came from lizards that were small. So given enough time, something can get real big and something can get real small, but it has to be a lot of time.
So lizard.
Now they think that the dinosaurs evolved over, say, a period of about 100 million years. So, do you know how much bigger you have to get every year, or let's say every 100 years, to go from the size of a lizard to the size of a dinosaur? You know how much bigger you have to get every 100 years? 0.0001 millimeters, which is about that big every 100 years. If you got that much bigger every 100 years, you could go from the size of a lizard to the size of a dinosaur in just 10 or 20 million years. So for this to work, Darwin supposed, the Earth has to be very, very old. And we found out a lot of evidence since the time of Darwin that the Earth is really, really old. How old is the Earth?
4 billion.
4.5 billion years, which is really old. And we'll talk more about that later. Here's something cool that Darwin saw. Darwin saw these giant tortoises, and you only find giant tortoises in the Galapagos Islands. And they're huge. On some islands, the giant tortoises had real long necks. And on other islands, they had real short necks. And Darwin wondered why the tortoises would be different on all these different islands. Why not? It's just a small group of islands. Why weren't all the tortoises the same? He noticed that on some islands, the food, the only thing to eat for the tortoises were cactuses. And on some islands, the cactuses were real tall. And it was on those islands that the tortoises had real long necks. And on other islands, there was plenty of food on the ground to eat. You didn't have to eat cactuses. And on those islands, the tortoises had short necks. So he figured maybe the tortoises came to the island a long time ago, and the ones that were on the islands that had the tall cactuses, they evolved longer necks. They changed to evolve longer necks so they could eat. And the ones that were on the islands that had other food, they didn't have to evolve long necks because they could reach the food that was on the ground.
Could they have had?
This is what Charles Darwin reasoned probably happened. He didn't have the fossil records to show that that actually happened, but now we do, and we see that he was right. Yes?
Could they have had like a middle or medium-sized neck and then evolved downwards to get a shorter neck?
They could. They could. If for some reason they didn't, the long neck was a disadvantage, maybe the neck could have become shorter. But he figured that since most tortoises have short necks, they probably evolved to be longer rather than the other way around. In turtles, if you see a turtle, their necks are usually pretty short. Look at these things. Look at that neck. That's one of the long-necked tortoises. Isn't that neck great? Don't you just want to grab that neck?
Yep.
Look at that neck. There's our group. There's me with a tortoise. He's looking at me.
What are you doing?
He's going, what is this guy?
Is he slow?
Yeah, they're real slow. And
How
they
much-
live hundreds of years.
How much do they weigh?
Oh, they're 1,000 pounds. I don't know. They're real heavy.
Could you pick one up, Mr. Willis?
They wouldn't let you touch him. There's
Mr.
one.
Willis could.
There's one running through the woods.
Wait, running?
Running.
Yeah, they run pretty slow. There's me with one. He's in a bog. You just be driving along the road and they're sitting there on the side of the road. There's a tortoise shell. Me in a tortoise shell. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Isn't that great?
That would be my profile picture on everything.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That thing was heavy too. It was like 100 pounds. I could barely hold it up.
Is that those long?
These are the giant cactuses that are found on those islands with the long-necked
Wait,
tortoises.
that's what they have to reach their neck to?
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to reach that one.
No.
But they might be able to get it as it's growing to that size.
Yeah.
And the faster this thing grows, the better chance it has of surviving. So these things grow pretty quickly to avoid getting eaten by the tortoises. It's an interesting arms race that's going on these islands. Look, there's me next to one of these giant cactuses. Look, I can't reach the food. I'm going to die. There's me next to a short cactus. And this one is found on the islands where there's other food to eat on the ground for the tortoises. So they grow a lot shorter on these islands because the tortoises are eating other foods. They're not eating the cactuses. So the cactuses aren't tall. So Darwin thought not only did the tortoises evolve long necks to eat the cactuses, but the cactuses on those islands evolved to be a lot taller. Not only do the animals change, the plants can change too. Yes, Britton?
So is it like reciprocal? That's right.
Yeah, it's called coevolution is actually the name of that. Both the tortoises are evolving and the plants are evolving. And they both evolve slowly, but if you look much longer later, you can see the results of the evolution. I was kind of tired at that point. I was like, okay, take the picture. These are Darwin's finches. There are hundreds of finches on the islands. And Darwin wasn't a bird expert, so he shot all these birds and he put them in jars and he brought them back to England and he had a bird expert look at them. And this bird expert looked at them and he said, those are all finches. And Darwin said, really? And he said, yeah, they're all finches. And Darwin said, but some of them have little tiny beaks, and some of them have big fat beaks, and some of them have really thick beaks. And the guy said, yeah, you know, these are new species of finches we had never seen, but they're definitely all finches. I can tell because I'm a bird expert. And then Darwin was like, okay. Darwin figured the reason why they have different beaks is probably because there's different food for them on each island. This island has a certain type of nut that you need a big, thick beak to crack, and so those finches evolve really thick beaks. This island has insects in holes in trees, and you need really thin beaks to get at those insects. And Darwin, being a very intelligent, hard-working naturalist, had carefully written down all the different types of food items available on every island. So once he got back to England and they told him that these were all finches, he went back through his notes and he saw what was on each island to eat, and he found the correlation that for finches that had thick beaks, there were hard nuts that they had to crack to eat. It was very good scientific work that he did. Yeah.
Were some birds smart, like the monkeys, like they'll stick the stick into the
There were
bed?
some birds that used tools, and they used sticks to get insects out of the holes in the trees. And Darwin, that was a great discovery because no one had seen animals used tools before. That was a really big thing. So that was another cool thing that Darwin found. Tom Willis. Josie's checking. Which Josie? I got two Josies. Josie Rant. Okay, thank you. Okay, bye. Josie Rant is checking out. Okay, so we're pretty much out of time here. We have to go to lunch soon.
Yeah.
So we get 2 days on this chapter. So make sure you read some of it. Then we'll go. Oh wait, how about one 10-point question? You want a 10-point question?
Yeah. Mr. Willis.
What type of animals did Darwin's mother keep? For 10 points.